The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Yes, it's Wednesday. It's not. It's Thursday, April 13th. Holy cow, time flies. 2017. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the four-time award-winning Majority Report. We are not broadcasting live, ladies and gentlemen. We are broadcasting to tape. Steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. Folks, it is one of our vacation shows. We have a brand new interview. This one I found really interesting. Really interesting. A professor from, I think, the University of Manitoba, if I remember correctly, Henry Heller, on his book, The Capitalist University, The Transformations of Higher Education in the United States from 1945 to 2016. Fascinating look at both the relationship between what's happening in the world and what happens in the university, and then how it cycles back on itself. And a bit of a critique on history and all that. I think you'll find it very interesting, and I hope you enjoy it. Also, just a reminder, MR Spring 17. MR Spring 17 gives you, use that coupon code at justcoffee.coop, and you will get 30% off your coffee, free shipping, only in the month of April. MR Spring 17, MR Spring 17. Make sure you check it out. Gives you a great opportunity to try the different varieties of coffee they have. And if you've heard me talk about Just Coffee, gives you a great opportunity to try it. It's still early enough in the month where you could actually get a 1 pound bag and go, holy crap, I love this. I'm going to get a 5 pound bag. In fact, I'm going to get 5 5-pound bags. You can get the Majority Report blend, or you can get any of those other blends. Check it out, justcoffee.coop. And remember, this show relies on its members for the vast, vast majority, 90-some-odd% of its revenue. So if you have the financial means to become a member, please do so today at jointhemajority.report.com. Obviously keeps the show chugging along. And if you're one of those people who can't afford it, but you want the extra material that we put out virtually every single day for members, and a lot of it, people sometimes go through, they've got to care for their parents, or they've lost a job, or whatever it is. I've heard all sorts of different types of, people, and it's not necessary to give us details in this situation. But, and so if you're one of those people where having the ability to get entertainment, an extra hour or two of entertainment that helps you through your day, but you can't afford it, please, by all means, send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. Have a little patience with us, because I'm always like a week behind the emails, at least. But we will set you up with all access. Okay, it's Thursday, and last night, undoubtedly, I don't know, I'm on vacation, I fell asleep, probably in Saul's room. Why? Because he won't go to bed unless I lie down next to him. And when I lie down on his Casper mattress, guess what I do? I fall asleep. Why? Because Casper is an obsessively engineered mattress at a shockingly fair price. I mean, to be fair to myself, I'm not lying on it anxious about how much it cost if it wasn't a fair price. Although I've been known to obsess for an extended period of time on how much I pay for something if it's not good. Supportive Memory Foam creates an award-winning sleep surface with just the right sink, and the right bounce. But the best part of Casper, I always say, and I think other places have now tried to copy this, but you get Casper for 100 nights risk-free in your own home. They deliver the mattress. It pops out of a box. And if you don't love it, they'll pick it up and refund you everything. I mean, this is an amazing concept. This is one of the things that I think, when people say, what's something that, when you were a kid that you couldn't even imagine? Trying out your mattress Hugely important.
Yeah, it comes in a mini fridge-sized box. It is very Jetsons-like.
It's crazy, and it's like shrink wrapped, and then all of a sudden it's a serious mattress. With over 20,000 reviews on an average of 4.8 stars, it's becoming the internet's favorite mattress. Get $50 toward any mattress purchase by visiting Casper.com/majority using the offer code MAJORITY. That's Casper.com/majority using the offer code MAJORITY. Terms and conditions apply. So enjoy today's interview, Henry Heller. Tomorrow we'll have another great one for you, and we'll be back live on Monday. This is Henry Heller. Quick break. And if you are a member, stick around because Matt has one of his famous potluck member clips. You know why we call it potluck? Because you're lucky. And Matt's high when he picks it out. Oh, God. All right, here we go. We are back. Sam Cedar on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program Henry Heller. He is a professor of history at the University of Manitoba, Canada, author of several books, including The Birth of Capitalism, a 21st Century Perspective, and his most recent, The Capitalist University, The Transformation of Higher Education in the United States since 1945. Henry, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you very much, Sam. Pleasure to be on the air with you.
So tell us, why start at 1945? What was fundamental about the sort of the post-World War II era in terms of universities as opposed to the post-World War II post-era?
Yes. Well, post-1945, the United States entered into the period of its global ascendancy, and as part of that process, you have the consolidation of the Keynesian state, the compromise between labor and capital, and the United States becomes the hegemonic power worldwide. And as part of that, you see the universities, which up until this point had largely not had any real research functions, and had been largely concerned with educating the upper middle class. You see a transformation of the universities, who now come to occupy a major institutional life in this new paradigm for the United States, in which this globalized economy, this political hegemony, is now reinforced by the major development of its educational and research institutions, which are now opened up to the lower middle class and even the elements of the working class after 1945. So you have the research university, and you have the mass democratic university after 1945.
And what were the forces that drove those two sort of parallel phenomena? Were they the same forces with the same impetus, essentially, or what drove those changes?
Well, the United States, for its new prominence and role in the world, needed a better educated workforce. It needed major research institutions which could back up its political and economic ambitions. And the universities basically provided that function after 1945. Plus, I would say also that, in a way, the New Deal thrust towards egalitarianism was blunted during the Cold War, and instead you have this emergence of a kind of meritocratic system whereby people from the lower middle class and even the working class were offered upward mobility, or so it seemed, as part of this very ambitious global political system.
And so you've divided up the history going forward from 45 into essentially three major periods, from 1945 1960, the 60s, essentially, I guess, going to 1980 and then 1980 to 2008. Let's start with that Cold War period, the post World War II period, 1945 and 1960. So we have this sort of democratization of the university, and simultaneously we have the expansion of the university in their research function.
Yes.
Driven by
and very. Sorry.
No, please.
Very close. The research function carried out with very close partnership with the government, who becomes a major funder, but also, of course, keeping in mind business. And many of the top universities are involved in Cold War research. They're doing work for the military. They're doing work for the CIA, and then I would say that the humanities and the social sciences provide a lot of cover in terms of defending liberal democracy, but also capitalism and American imperialism. It's one of the features of my book. That is to say, I go over the main disciplines and I show at the top level the paradigms, whether it's in economics or in psychology or in history or in literature, across the board, very much reinforce the American way of the world and try to project it onto the rest of the world. So there's that. But the government provides huge funding for this, and there's an enormous expansion of the universities. But and considerable attainment. I mean, I want to emphasize that the attainment of American universities in both educating millions and also the research is a tremendous cultural achievement. But at the same time, there's massive repression accompanying it. Any dissidence, and especially anything from the left, is basically repressed or excluded. And of course, it's the period of McCarthyism.
All right, well,
so I would say those are the main features of the period to the 1960s.
I want to bore in a little bit on the use of these different disciplines in essentially, and perhaps I'm even framing that incorrectly, but that how these disciplines and the breaking out of these disciplines and the top line of these functioning of these disciplines provided that repression and essentially corralled things in terms of thought. Give us a I'll give you some examples. Please.
Okay, is that okay?
Yes, please.
Well, in my discipline, history, you have I use two examples. You have Crane Brinton, who becomes the head of the American Historical Association, who's also the head of the CIA Intelligence Division. Mm. He writes a book called Anatomy of Revolution, which is basically, it's not stupid by any means, but it's a sophisticated attack on the idea of revolutionary change. And that's sort of the global perspective. Internally, you have the dominance of the so-called liberal consensus historians who downplay the role of social conflict in the shaping of American history, and the total exclusion, really, of any real consideration of, say, the black role in the United States in terms of not only its labor but also the struggle against slavery. And it's notable that a historian like Abfecker because he was a communist, he was a historian and a pretty good historian. This Herbert Aptheker pioneered in the study of American slave revolts, and the historical profession basically marginalized and ignored this person. He could never get a job because of his membership in the Communist Party. But in sociology, you have Talcott Parsons in the structural functionalism, which again undercuts social realities basically based on equilibrium, and any kind of dissidence is basically set off by compensating factors. There's no class conflict in America. In English, you have really the total exclusion of the social and political, and in English, in that discipline, literature becomes a kind of aesthetic object rather than a projection of the underlying social conflicts in society. And of course, in economics, you have Keynesian economics, which again is constantly seeking for equilibrium and really trying to avoid, with some success at this period, anything that is going to cause a major rupture or crisis. And of course, looking backwards, the fear of another economic depression lies behind this insistence on economics as a subject focused on equilibrium. So those are some of the examples.
And economics too, and I guess this is already sort of a pre-existing disposition towards economics, but economics as a science or as a sort of a natural
very
science,
much so.
as opposed to one that has sort of, I guess, comes with its own a priori its own priors, I guess, in terms of the way one.
Yes, and also I think that what's missing in throughout, and I would say even the historians, they don't have a historical view of their subject, and they don't see their subject in global terms. America is seen as basically a world unto itself, and it doesn't fit into world history. And I would say in economics, the history of the modern world is based on a whole series of crises, and basically economics seems to ignore that historical background, and of course paying the price when the United States begins to run into difficulties from the 1970s onwards.
So, I mean, how are these phenomena you describe in terms of the way that these disciplines change, the stripping out of any type of, or I should say, of much of, let's say, the social import of English and literature, and making it wholly about aesthetics. I mean, what drives that? I mean, how does that happen from university to university? I mean, I can understand maybe in the context of one university, but what is it that creates that framework for that type of broad change?
Let's focus on English as a subject. Now, in the 1920s and 30s, there were important critics in American studying literary criticism who took a social perspective on literature. But when the Cold War set in, certain schools emerged which came to the fore and were given prominence because anti-Marxism, anti-communism, that was dominant politically, and so it infiltrated, and the professors who were basically taking an aesthetic view of literature like Lionel Trilling at Columbia, who had enormous influence. And the new critics, many of them coming from the South, they gained more and more prominence. And the way it worked was the people who had a social point of view were marginalized and in some cases basically suppressed because of their left-wing associations. And these other people were given more and more of a voice. You could see the same thing happening in a subject like sociology, where on the one hand, as recently indicated, you have somebody like W.E. Du Bois, who's absolutely critical to an understanding of American sociology. He's totally suppressed. And instead you have Talcott Parsons, who is a prominent Harvard sociologist with close ties to the CIA. His structural functionism becomes the standard, and one has to understand that American university education is a hierarchy, and the Ivy League schools historically dominated the profession. And so what came down from these professors largely ensconced in the Ivy League schools and controlling the journals and the other sources of publication, they set the standard for everybody else. And so their students were given jobs, and these conservative paradigms came to dominate American academe. And I would say at the same time, they got rid of some very good left-wing professors, and they wouldn't, America was sealed off. They talk about the Cold War and how Russia was behind the Iron Curtain. Well, the United States was behind an Iron Curtain. There was tremendous innovation going on amongst left-wing writers and intellectuals in Europe and even in the Third World during this Cold War. And none of this reached the shores of the United States until the 1960s. I'm talking about the works of people like Gramsci, for example, and other prominent scholars in Europe were largely unknown in the United States because they were excluded. So there was a kind of provincialism that marked American university life during the height of the Cold War. Of course, things changed. Sorry.
Well, no, I mean, I just wonder, because I'm so fascinated by how this works systemically. And
yes, that's an interesting feature.
And so you have a guy like Trilling, for instance, who will win awards and who will get scholarships and will get prominent play in journals or in
New York Times Book Review, etc.
Exactly, and there really doesn't have to be, particularly at that time, and even now, I would say, it seems to me, I mean, that you have a certain group of people who have the money.
Yes, and the people who are making the editorial decisions and so on, they understand what the limits in which they're operating, and they pre-select and exclude anything which is considered too extreme, and they bring forward people who tend to rationalize what is going on. I think the difference now is that it's becoming increasingly difficult to do that, although I think it still exists. I mean, we could talk about the outside the universities, the media, and there's this huge struggle going on between the social media program like yours, for example, and so on, and the dominant corporate media. Well, the same thing applies in academia. The people who are pre-selected on the basis of their acceptability within the dominant paradigms, and it worked across the board in American academia until the 1960s.
Indeed, and so let's talk about what happened in the 60s. What changed in the 60s that challenged that regime?
I would say, in the first place, the civil rights struggle is fundamentally important, and that's one of the, I think, an interesting feature of my book, in that I give a lot of credit to the historically black colleges in the South. We hear about Martin Luther King and the importance of the black churches, but there were over 100 black colleges in the United States in the South, and from there you had cadres of young men and women who powerfully reinforced the civil rights struggle when it broke out, and they were the ones who brought it to the northern and western universities. And the civil rights struggle reached universities like Berkeley and Ann Arbor and so on, and so that became a major source of unrest. In addition to that, there was the fact that the universities themselves, they had known dramatic growth after the war, millions and billions of dollars invested in them. They were corporate institutions. There was a lot of both intellectual and social repression, sexual repression in the universities, and it burst forth at Berkeley and the free speech movement at Berkeley in 1964, where all of this came to be challenged, and it was understood that it was the corporate structure of the universities which was responsible, that and the Cold War, which was responsible for the repression that existed on the campuses. Added to which, finally, you have the American involvement in Vietnam, the danger of the draft, and you have so it's a kind of a threefold movement amongst the students. I want to stress that it's the students who really are responsible. They take up civil rights. It turns into the Black Power movement. They challenge the Vietnam War. It's from the campuses that the anti-war protests go out, and they challenge the bureaucratic corporate structure, the ties with the military that the universities have during the 1960s. And so there's great unrest coming from the universities during that period. And in that period, too, there was a very considerable revival of Marxism from Europe, and also then a new generation of young scholars, people like Genovese, Eric Wolf, who transform academic life. They create new paradigms, and based on Marxism, but new paradigms for sort of analyzing American society and also American imperialism. And there's a tremendous scholarly achievement. I want to stress as well that, for example, in a field like anthropology, you have women for the first time taking the lead in a field like anthropology, Kathleen Guth, and so on, who break new ground in sort of understanding the relationship between a subject like anthropology and European and American imperialism. So it's a period of enormous creativity, the 1960s. And I would say, sorry,
no,
did
go
you
ahead.
want to? So the 1960s is a real breakthrough period. The American universities, for the first time, overcome their provincialism. Up until this time, I would say that American universities, they're not at the focal point of world intellectual life. But from the 60s onwards, American universities, with their enormous resources, become absolute leaders in terms of breakthrough scholarship. I mean, to say nothing of what is going on in the sciences and engineering and all the rest, because I do in the book deal with the background, the political economy of the universities, what's going on. I mean, the liberal arts and the social sciences is the focal point, but I pay attention to the fact that, across the board, American universities are absolutely in the vanguard. The cultural capital that is built up by the United States during this period is simply amazing.
You're speaking like throughout the world. I mean, you had people coming from around the world at that point.
Yes, and American intellectual life becomes cosmopolitan, becomes a world. The United States becomes a focal point of world culture during the 1960s.
Is there a narrative of a disruption or a democratization or a leveling of the reward structure and the incentive structure there that allowed these sort of three social movements and social phenomena to displace the old order, as it were, or was it?
Yes. Sorry.
No, please describe that.
Well, I think the establishment held on, and they held on by making concessions, and they were able to make concessions both to faculty and to students, because these were the very best of times. Through the 1960s into the early 70s, American prosperity was at its height at that period. Consumer capitalism was a great success, and there was an enormous and constant increase in student enrollment and both state and federal funding of universities during this period. So the established order, they did institute a partial democratization. They allowed faculty and students a somewhat greater role in university governments. But overall, and they also conceded as black liberation, women's liberation, gay liberation kicked in toward the end of this period, they made concessions, they established departments, and so they were able to hold on to the ultimate sources of power within the universities through the period, while making concessions. There was an enormous demand for new professors, new faculty, and so a lot of people were given tenure, and this was a very good period for people who were involved in this profession. So that's basically what happened. But there was no structural reordering, I would say, during this period.
It was just a period of easy choices, I guess. Like you didn't have to
easy choices and reform.
You could just say yes, and not necessarily when you add a department at that point, you don't have to make cuts anywhere else. So it becomes a much easier, I guess, concession to make. And it's important to see this in relationship to the reforms that were instituted in politics overall in the United States. You know, the concessions to minority populations and so on, and the war against poverty and all the rest of it, which did some good at that time. And so through the 70s, we have a series of oil shocks, of course, and inflation and stagflation. And so that those yeses come at an increasing cost, I guess, is part of that story. And that leads us to 1980, a retreat from history, as you call it. What happens in 1980?
Well, one of the features of the period of upheaval was the recovery of history. Not only did history become a leading field, but also fields like anthropology and sociology took on a historical aspect to them. They took history seriously. After 1980, there's a great amnesia sets in, and you have the rise of two movements which seem on the surface to be very diametrically opposed, but in fact they are connected with one another. And the first of them is, of course, postmodernism, and on the other hand, neoclassical economics, which of course, postmodernism, and this postmodernism then becomes dominant from the 1950s, basically until the onset of the crisis in 2008. And it is a form of extreme skepticism, is postmodernism. It rejects narrative. It rejects the idea that social reality makes any sense, that you can develop some sort of a social political understanding of the external world, and therefore it undercuts the idea that not being able to understand the world, how can you change the world? So there is a retreat in academe, especially in the subjects like English and other humanist subjects, from political activism, and at the same time you have the rise of cultural studies, which moves away from kind of a social and economic analysis towards cultural explanations, but and basically asserts that history is very complicated, and that mere social and economic explanations are insufficient in explaining social or historical change. And finally, you have neoclassical economics, which basically is an attempt to return to the liberalism of the 19th century, and is basically a repudiation of history. The common thread is either the complication of history or the questioning of historical explanation. Postmodernism rejects history, likewise does neoclassical liberal economics. Same thing. It's a repudiation of the historical process.
Well, there's the two things I want to ask you. One is, like, what led to the return of history, and then the rise of postmodernism? I can see that as a rejection of history. But how is the neoclassical economics? How does that? What is the process in which it rejects history?
Well, in the first place, it rejects the failures of liberalism, the failure of liberal capitalism in the 19th and early 20th century, and really there were a series of economic crises, and culminating in the great crisis of 1929-1939, which was the end point of liberal economics, which up until then had dominated the teaching of economics in the English-speaking world, including the United States. There was a complete collapse of that whole paradigm, the liberal paradigm, and that was the historical lesson. And instead, Keynesianism emerged as a alternative, where the government, the lesson of history was that we need the government, and we need to cooperate with labor in order to, if we're going to run a capitalist economy, we have to have that kind of partnership. And neoliberalism basically repudiated that whole lesson. It repudiated the crisis of the Depression of the 1930s, and it repudiated the idea of government constraint or including labor in any kind of economic deal.
Okay.
It was an attempt to return to as fully as possible to the pure market. So I'm saying that it repudiated history as much as did postmodernism, which rejected all historical narrative.
I see.
You couldn't make sense of the past.
So the adoption, the readoption of that economic worldview, as it were, is in fact basically just simply ignoring the historical precedent for why it went away in the first place.
That's right. It's a kind of amnesia. But I want to say that, and so academia as a whole after 1980 retreated, we can say, into the ivory tower. Almost all the fields in social science and in the humanities were affected by these disciplines. In fact, economics, in what they call economics imperialism, it infiltrated into political science, into anthropology, even the historical discipline, and it tried to take over and show that these neoliberal paradigms could be applied. This is all ridiculous, but they tried to apply the neoliberal models in other historical disciplines as well. So those were the general trends, but I want to underline that there were certain people who stand out resisting and who have become very important in American academic life. And the one person who is really outstanding throughout this period and beyond, the outstanding American intellectual of our time, it's important to mention this, is this guy Jameson, Frederick Jameson from Duke University. He's not a historian. He's a fantastic philosopher, literary critic, who takes a historical Marxist view of all of the disciplines, and he says the fundamental thing that one has to do is to historicize social, political, and cultural phenomenon. All of these things have to be understood in a historical way. You cannot understand the present, and you cannot understand what is going to happen unless you understand the past. And his great achievement is to basically show how this can be done in disciplines in which it's very difficult to do that. I mean, I'm talking about literary studies, English, French. He has created models for understanding the cultural aspect of life, in which are absolutely breakthrough. And Jameson is the towering American intellectual of our time. And it's notable that he is given, outside of restricted circles of academia, nobody knows this guy's name.
No.
Yet he's the Hegel, he's the Marx, he's the great figure. I mean, he's a towering American achievement, and in America, he's virtually unknown.
And so let me just, going back to that shift at 1980, just for one moment, is that a function of, I mean, the rise, obviously, of neoliberal economics or neoclassical, and is this a function of essentially just the election of Reagan? I mean, or is it all the factors that brought us to that? I mean, is it what causes that in academia? Is it something that more broadly influenced by society, and what were those factors?
Okay, that's well put, because what happened was that the Keynesian model of government intervention and a partnership with labor broke down. Capital began to have more and more trouble acquiring appropriate levels of profit so that it could continue to function successfully. And so they began to cast around for alternatives that could be basically a new ideology. And lo and behold, you have from the margins, and in particular from the University of Chicago, the school of Milton Friedman, suddenly, because a call goes out, suddenly Keynesianism is out. And in the economics department across the United States, new paradigm comes in from the big schools again, and especially from the University of Chicago, but the other ones go right along. The leading professors come to be the exponents of this neoliberal paradigm, and its Keynesianism disappears overnight, and a new generation, younger generation of professors comes in, and they begin to espouse this new doctrine. And they go further because they say that not only should this liberal economics be taught and implemented by government, but universities themselves should be reorganized in terms of the principles of corporate America, that the universities, which, by the way, it's in this period that I have described, the 50s and the 60s, as public servants institutions, they achieved their great success. These people say that the universities themselves should be reorganized, and so you have the development of what I call the capitalist university, the academic capitalism. The same principles of neoclassical economics are turned inward in the universities, and academic life, and indeed the whole life of the universities, is reorganized in terms of the rationalizing principles of neoliberal economics. And basically, academia is intimidated. The professors are, and the students are just overwhelmed by the influence of these new economic paradigms on the university. And whatever critical function the universities had comes to be undercut by, well, these new ideological currents, but also the underfunding. That's very important. The underfunding that kicks in after 1980. The universities are defunded. So there's an ideological assault going on, and there is an underfunding. And the universities, despite efforts to fight back, are increasingly beleaguered institutions. I just want to say that my view is that essentially what this neoliberalism is doing is parasitizing the accomplishments of the universities during the 50s and 60s. They're living off the cultural capital that was developed previously, and they are basically destroying the great achievements of the 50s and 60s. We're witnessing this right now, along with, of course, with the coming to power of Trump, Betty DeVos. There's this massive assault going on
There's just a
American intellectual and cultural life.
So, okay, so if I understand what happens at that time, the universities, because they're underfunded, essentially the value that they have created, not necessarily a market value, but the value they've created is extracted.
Both economic and cultural, yeah.
And the universities are set up in such a way where their fundamental, I guess, reason for being is in some way mutated, where they must measure themselves against a bottom line versus some other ideal, some more other ideal, that
the public good. And I want to say, wait a minute, but I want to say that the public good is it has I don't want to even use this language because I don't like it's vulgarizing everything into economics, which is just a terrible distortion of social reality. But I'm using this language anyway. The point is that the public service university of the 50s and 60s provided enormous economic benefits to the United States. And what we're seeing is the erosion of this. This is what's going on.
And in addition, obviously,
that's why I'm saying it's not going to work.
And so let me just get one more point just about what happens there. Is that ascendancy of? I mean, it seems to me that the difference between that 1980 period and that 1945 period is that the influx of resources and the I guess the paradigm shift, instead of it coming from the military industrial complex, if you will, in 1945, it is now coming from a very self-consciously concerted effort by those who share that neoliberal ideology. So in the 70s, you start to get things like the Heritage Foundation, and you start to get things like those families that fund these things. And
enormous influxes of their influence. Foundation after foundation. Big corporate money is going into basically transforming academic life, and indeed privatizing academic life, in order to have the universities serve the direct interests of business. And I'm claiming in my book that, in fact, despite all that, they are transforming the universities, and they may muffle voices from the university, but it's not going to work for them. The government is not funding the universities, and the government is the main source. And so they're economically undercutting the universities, and the universities served the private interests crucially in the period of the high ascendancy of the United States. I see this as a symptom of decline, really. It's a symptom of decline in the United States, that this process is going on. I mean, it's part of the general malfunction of American society. The people down in the United States and everywhere have to begin fighting back, because these people are bent. They are benefiting, but ordinary people are suffering more and more in every way, including academics, but everybody else too. And as a result of this devastation that neoliberalism and, frankly, the capitalist class is inflicting on the rest of the population.
And is that why that last period ends in 2008? Because following 2008, there's a sort of a new consciousness. Yes. The financial crisis.
Yes.
Yeah. Just talk.
Well, what's happened now after 2008 is that on the one hand, the public woke up. They discovered the 1%, and there has been a dramatic rise in consciousness all over the United States. Everybody understands the 1%. On the other hand, the Wall Street, the capitalists, the neo-capitalist ideologues in the economics departments whose careers were based on this, they're fighting to keep hold of their power. And on the other hand, the rest of us are trying to organize resistance to what's going on. And so far, the other side is winning. And it's time for us to win. That basically, and I think that the universities can play a role. They have this tradition from the 60s, and it partly is reviving, but it needs to revive and help lead the way to a general resistance against what is happening in the United States. I mean, one can fear the worst in terms of what might happen.
And lastly, I mean, are you seeing evidence of that happening within higher education in this country?
Well, I think that students and faculty, there is a growing understanding. Well, Marxism has come back big time. Marxism, in terms of what is going on in the United States, if you pay attention, Marxist publications, Marxist thought is becoming increasingly central to the discussion in the United States, both within the university and to a certain extent outside. And at the same time, you have these anti-racist, feminist movements and so on within the universities, and you have the unionization movement, which has particularly captured the non-tenured and the graduate student element within the universities in the United States, that movement is growing. Organized labor is involved, and hopefully there will one of the universities can be one place where resistance to what is going on can develop.
Henry Heller.
That's what I would say.
Henry Heller, the Capitalist University, the transformation of higher education in the United States since 1945. Thank you so much for your time today. We'll put a link to your book at majority.fm.
Thank
really
you so much,
appreciate it.
Sam.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.